The Zambian business diaspora has labelled the 2015 national budget as boring, with few surprises. CNBC Africa, together with KPMG, hosted a discussion and analysis on what the numbers mean for the country. Godfrey Mutizwa sat down with the experts to dissect the key changes stemming from Zambia's 2014 budget speech. Join this special debate on Tuesday, the 28th of October at 1:30 p.m. Central African Time, only on CNBC Africa. First in business, worldwide.
This budget discussion broadcast is proudly brought to you by KPMG Zambia.
Zambia, for years Africa's biggest copper producer, is celebrating 50 years of independence. Since 1964, the country has gone through significant transformation. The current government, led by President Macroeconomic, has embarked on far-reaching economic and structural reforms that have boosted economic growth and made it one of the fastest-growing African economies. Its 2015 budget is testament to the progress made. Hello and a warm welcome to this CNBC Africa Zambia budget special feature. I'm Godfrey Mutizwa. Now, the general remarks around Zambia's new budget seem to suggest that this was a standstill budget with very few surprises. We do know that the markets, of course, prefer these so-called boring budgets. But is it good for the future of the country's economy? That's the main question we raised with a panel of Zambian experts during a recent post-budget breakfast in the capital, Lusaka. But before we delve into the discussion, let's get the view of one of the big four tax and auditing firms operating in the African continent. KPMG Zambia is responsible for assisting both public and private sector players to navigate the local taxation landscape. Jason Kazilimani, Senior Partner and Chief Executive of KPMG Zambia, addressed some of the challenges faced in growing the Zambian economy.
At the moment, I would say it's the lack of sufficient participation by SMEs. If you look at any economy in the world, they're really driven by SMEs. Look at the Asian tigers. They started with the SME sector being strengthened and really contributing overall. In Zambia at the moment, the challenge is that most of the business is actually run by the big business houses, the big mining houses, the big corporates. The SMEs are still not very much a factor in creating value in Zambia's economy. I think that's probably the greatest challenge which we need to sort out. If you look at the intentions that the minister has announced, for example, in the area of skills and education training, the minister has said that government will continue to build new tertiary institutions. They're talking about building another 9 tertiary institutions across the country. And these will bring out skilled artisans, skilled technicians, and so on and so forth. The universities that they already started building 2 years ago are nearing completion, and they should be coming on board in the next few months. So that's one. The other one, obviously, is the continued investment in infrastructure. The minister has announced that the government will continue to build the roads. The roads project will be ongoing. They've given the local electricity utility, ZESCO, some more money to rehabilitate power stations. And all this infrastructure, building of roads, creating more power generation capacity, will help the SMEs to come into their own and enable people to, a lot of small businesses, even the rural areas, to actually start their own businesses. Will greatly add to the growth of the economy.
According to Kazilimani, there's still more that the Zambian government can do to address these challenges.
I think what government can do is more tax incentives, especially for the SMEs that can demonstrate that they will comply with the minimum standards set by the Zambia Bureau of Standards. And in that way, say large corporates that may want to outsource some of their processes to SMEs will be assured that, look, this SME, the product that they'll create will be as good as the product that I'll make in my own factory. So tax incentives that will enable SMEs, such SMEs, to come to the fore would be a great thing.
It's not, of course, just the auditing firms that need to navigate the new budget landscape. At a special post-budget breakfast hosted in the capital, Lusaka, I sat down with a panel of experts to get their thoughts on what it all meant. I started the discussion by addressing the elephant in the room, the introduction of mining royalties and scrapping of corporate taxes on mining companies. I asked Jackson Sikamo, CEO of the Zambia Chamber of Mines, whether the government was using a blunt instrument to address a variety of other problems and perhaps failing to see the longer-term damage that it would do to the engine of Zambia's economy.
Obviously, we cannot comment directly about whether the government is using a blunt instrument to address various problems. But what I would like to say is that the change of the tax system from where we were to where we are going to now is that we will be depending on the mineral royalty tax only for all the mining companies, with the underground operations going in at 8% and open pit operations at 20%. Mineral royalty tax, the way it is that you're actually paying on gross revenue, and it's a cash tax, so which means you must have the cash to pay immediately after the period in which you have done business. Thirdly, mineral royalty does not encourage investment, long-term investment. We all know that mining, by its nature, is a business which is long-term, and it needs continuous investment as you progress the business. Mineral royalties, there is no capacity for you to get relief as far as investing in the business is concerned. Yeah. So it's a tax which does not necessarily encourage investment. Yeah. Obviously, without investment, you cannot be looking at a very bright future.
So I want you to, in the media we like hyperbole. I want you to use big words that adequately capture what has happened here. Is this catastrophic?
I would not say it's catastrophic. As we sit right now, our various members, the various mining companies, we are looking at the impact of these new taxes on the businesses, so that we can, give, factual information, give informed opinions on what exactly is going to be the impact on the businesses. Yeah. So we should have this position towards the end of this week, because by nature the mining business is complex. Although we are saying this is a simpler tax, some of our members on the same site, they will have underground operations, they will have open pits, they will have smelters, and the cathode copper they produce is the same. Right. So we need to look at what would be the mechanics of establishing that this copper came from underground, this copper came from the open pit, and in some cases we have members who are reclaiming tailings. Reclaiming tailings is also a form of mining. What type of tax are we going to give to those, those operations? So there are various issues that we need to sit down and look at before we can come to a final position on the impact.
What was the private sector's response to the proposals made for the mining industry? How did they see the scenario unfolding? I asked Leonard Mwanza from the Zambian Bankers Forum to elaborate.
I think for us as bankers, this is a question of cash flow management. Right. And we need an efficient, effective way of collecting taxes. So the question to see is, are we going to see mines being more efficient in paying turnover tax? Are we going to see mines being more efficient in paying taxes as opposed to the corporate tax? So I think the bigger issue is it an efficient model of collecting taxes from the mines? And for us as bankers, it's a question of how is cash going to flow to us.
To the man tasked with analyzing the budget and ensuring that the collection of tax is done appropriately and efficiently, Chief Budget Analyst Kayula Chimfwembe, I asked him to give us a sense of the rationale behind the proposals in the budget.
Obviously, in arriving at this decision, you'd want to take cognizance that a lot of discussions have gone on in the background. Of course, within the Ministry of Finance, yes, and as well as government.
And with the mines themselves.
And with the mines themselves. And I think government did look at a number of alternatives, so to say, in trying to ensure that, as the Minister says, we try and somehow optimize the collection from the sector. Yeah. For the moment, what has been proposed is what the government thought would be adequate for now. But I think, as the meeting would note, this is just the beginning in terms of dialogue, as what he has proposed will be in terms of a bill which has to go through the National Assembly to be debated upon. Yeah. And I think the Chamber of Mines definitely, I know, will be called upon as witnesses.
So we had an audience of over 100 people, and we took some questions from the floor.
My name is Kingsley Chinkuli, the country manager for First Quantum Minerals. And I would like to start by referring to the remark by Mr. Kapindele, where he complained about lack of approvals for land for investors in Northwestern Province. And I'm sure that when he was speaking, he had First Quantum Minerals in mind. And he would like to encourage Mr. Kapindele to continue with his lobbying so that this issue can be resolved. Secondly, I would like to comment on what the budget analyst has said to the audience, that I think the process has just begun, and that I think at a later stage, they'll be able to listen to more views. I think what we would like to see is a listening government.
Sure.
I think it's very, very important because these issues affect the livelihood or the welfare of the people of Zambia. Now, thirdly, let me emphasize that mining in Zambia still remains the backbone of the economy. We can talk about banking, we can talk about other sectors, but without a thriving mining industry,
Yes.
we are really doomed. I will not say tragic, as you say, moderator. But without, therefore, making sure that the mining industry is thriving, we may be injuring ourselves. Now, let me refer to the proposal on mineral royalty. And I support the president of the Chamber of Mines from what he had said. Let me just say that the current proposal to us looks like the opposite of what many people in Zambia have been clamoring, and that is the introduction of the windfall tax. Now, we are of the view that when the copper price is low, with this introduction of the new tax regime, the mines will obviously struggle. And when the mines are struggling, then the GRZ, opts for taking a big slice of a small pie.
Yeah.
This is really our view. There are mines that are making losses at the moment, and if this regime is brought into effect next year, then these companies that are making losses will go out of business.
Would you go so far as to call it a disaster, like I was trying to get everybody to say?
I'll keep your word in mind. When these companies close, what will happen? No more revenue, there will be no room for improvement, no jobs.
Do you have a counter proposal, though?
Well, we are going to talk to the Minister of Finance again, if they're willing to discuss. We have made some proposals, but obviously, I must again go back to what I've said earlier. Let's have a listening government. Once that is done, I think everyone will be comfortable. What we want to see is a win-win situation, not where one takes advantage of the other.
Sure.
The question of ensuring that there is economic efficiency in terms of taxation is it's very paramount. One of the things people have advanced and in terms of discussion is to point to the fact that perhaps mineral royalties are not economically efficient, and when one is relying on such type of a tax system, you have to bear into mind what a long-term effect may be. I think just to indicate also that although some mining companies may be they're making losses for tax purposes, so to say, they still pay mineral royalty. No one is exempted from mineral royalty. Obviously, the law has to be very clear in terms of where underground is, and where perhaps open pit mining for companies which are involved in both open pit and underground mining. We hope that even as these things are being discussed in terms of the actual law changes to the law, I think this will be very clear. Obviously, it's the regime is not intended to punish, as obviously the minister said that. The differentiation really basically is inches more to do with the costs. Is acknowledging the fact that perhaps for those who are doing underground mining, there's a lot more costs that go into production compared to open pit mining.
Robert Liebenthal, Vice President of the Economic Association of Zambia, gave us his insight into the broad macro numbers in the context of a smaller budget deficit which went down to 5.5%. He gave us his view on the fine balance between keeping the deficit down while spending enough to keep the economy growing. I also asked him whether there was enough capex spend in the proposals to enable higher growth.
First of all, the deficit has been very much on the high side. You're absolutely right that Zambia needs, and all developing countries need, relatively high levels of public expenditure. But the problem with financing it through the deficit is that there are essentially two ways in which you do that. One is through external borrowing, which the government has done quite effectively with the Eurobond and so forth. There are issues with that, which maybe we can come back to. The other means is through domestic borrowing, which, as you've noted, he's trying to keep to 2% of GDP this coming year. And if that goes too high, that has relatively negative effects on interest rates and so forth. We know the interbank rate has come down, but the 6-month Treasury bill is, I think it's still at about 18%. And that means that for the banks, maybe Leonard will want to comment, it really sets almost a floor on interest rates by the banks. And that's a function of what the government has to pay in order to raise the money to finance its deficit.
Was there enough capex spend in the proposals that you saw there to sustain or perhaps push further Zambia's economic growth trajectory?
By and large, yes. I think that, it's not just capex. The capex is, I think, 6-7% of GDP. I mean, yes, we would all like to see more investment in infrastructure, but it's also expenditure on frontline services. Let's not forget that. In fact, in some ways, the most dramatic number that the minister put out in the speech was that 50% of Zambia's population is below the age of 18. Now, what that tells you is that investment in education, investment in frontline services like health and agriculture and so forth are absolutely crucial. That's recurrent expenditure, not much of that is capex.
We are going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we continue coverage of the Zambian budget for 2015. Welcome back. You are watching this CNBC Africa special on the Zambian budget. Now, earlier this month, the country released its 2015 Blueprint for Economic Growth. We sat down with a panel of experts from both the public and private sectors to unpack the strategies and the numbers behind it. Now, over the past 5 years, Zambia has improved in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. KPMG's Kazilimani said that this year's budget was supportive of that trend.
When you look at some of the measures, and these are non-tax measures that the government is putting in place, they've introduced now, they're going to make mandatory electronic filing of tax returns, be it income tax, pay as you earn, withholding tax, and so on and so forth. That will definitely make business much easier to run. And especially when you look at it from the point of view of a foreign investor coming in, who's used to world-class systems, world-class tax systems, coming to Zambia, which for a long time we've been using manual methods, a lot of paperwork. That's one way that the ease of doing business will be improved. And also, again, the issue of infrastructure development. The more infrastructure that Zambia has, the roads, power stations, and so on and so forth, that would definitely make Zambia an ideal place to do business. It will make cost of doing business much lower and the ease of doing business much smoother as well.
Job creation has become a national priority for most African nations, and Zambia is no different. Its government originally set a target to create 200,000 jobs in 2014, but it has now revised that number to 120,000. I asked the panelists about their thoughts on the numbers and what the budget could have done to help the government to achieve the target.
In the mining business, continuous investment is critical, and that's what creates jobs.
Sure.
Both direct jobs, indirect jobs, and what we call induced jobs. If you have a budget which is not going to encourage investment, I've already said that mineral royalty tax does not encourage investment.
Yeah.
It means that you're not going to be able to invest, and you're not going to increase your activities, which means you're not going to generate jobs. So we have. That's why I'm saying that we need to sit down and discuss quickly if we are going to get back to the business of creating jobs.
Absolutely. So the minister missed a step in here. Robert?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can think of any magic bullet that solves the job creation issue. And by and large, I completely agree with Jackson that the main driver is new investment. Whether you're talking about jobs in the formal sector, which is what tends to get most attention, or in the informal sector, which, let's not forget, is 90% of the labor force. The only point that I would perhaps emphasize comes back to what I was saying before, is that one of the critical elements in job creation is skill development.
Right.
It's not the only thing, but it's one of the most important ones. And it's particularly important for the government because it's government investment in education at all levels. And I'm not just talking about technical, vocational, higher level education, but also at lower levels of basic education and secondary, where the improvement in the quality of education is critical to ensuring that there are the skills necessary to create more employment.
Okay, so from your perspective, there was very little that the government could have done in this budget to try to make sure that they are able to reach their target. So maybe the target ought to come down from 200,000 jobs to maybe 150,000 jobs.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think that there's a little bit too much concern with only formal sector jobs, as I was trying to say.
Right.
We don't know with the same degree of precision what's happening in the informal sector, but that deserves a lot of attention as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's, with the exception of what's already been said about the mining sector, whether there's anything particularly notable that would have an effect on investment, which is what is going to create the jobs.
Now, entrepreneurship remains a critical factor in job creation, but with inflation sitting at 7.1% and lending rates between 12 and 13%, the cost of borrowing remains quite high in Zambia. Should the budget have perhaps made provision for this?
Speaking from an historic perspective, let's look at the trend of interest rates in the nation.
Yes.
I think 4 or 5 years ago, banks were lending as high as 30%. Starting from about April 2012, when the monetary process was introduced, banking interest as low as 21%, and right now they are sitting on 24%.
Right.
So
those are lending rates.
What we are saying is that right now, when we look at the lending rates for the banking sector, they are within acceptable margins, because the monetary policy is around 24% right now.
Yeah. As a player at the Coalface, I asked Jackson Sikamo from the Zambia Chamber of Mines what he thought needed to be done to reduce the cost of doing business in Zambia.
We've always, believed that there is a lot of room that needs to be done, on the banking, bank rates. We want to look at the efficiencies that can be there within the banking system to ensure that the costs which are incurred, which result in that margin remaining the way it is, are addressed. So we are looking for some efficiencies in the sector. We would like to see the margins reduced to about 2%. Okay. He's talking about 18 to 24. We would like to see 18 to 20, not 18 to 24.
After the views from the other panelists, we then turned our attention to the chief budget analyst, Kayula Chimfwembe, and I asked him to put things in context. I wanted to understand what kind of thought process went into looking into the budget and where job creation fitted into the whole mix.
Historical perspective in terms of what government has always brought out as macroeconomic objectives. In the past, you would not see a talk about job creation, but I think the government has been very bold to put the estimated jobs to be created as one of the objectives for the government.
Yeah.
Whether that happens actually or not, but I think for government to have done that, it's a very bold statement, and really the idea was that government was going to be open to ensure that everyone is following what it intends to do in terms of job creation.
Yeah.
Obviously, government, as in terms of civil service, you are limited in terms of the jobs that you can create, unless one wants to see a bloated civil service.
No, we don't want to see that.
Which is not giving any effect in terms of economic productivity. But of course, from government perspective, most of these jobs will have to be created by the private sector, as well as what may be called the informal sector.
Okay. What about this issue of the spreads in the market and trying to lower the cost of funds for banks as well as for businesses?
This is a very important question. Someone mentioned 6%, but I think if you look at the ranging rates above 20%, if I have a savings account, maybe the maximum on average I would get from the banks is about 2 to 3%. You mentioned about government constraining borrowing from the banking sector. I think that's a very positive direction, so that we do not stabilize the market in terms of interest rates and everything else.
And that's our coverage of the Zambia budget for 2015. From myself, Godfrey Mutizwa, and the team behind the scenes, it's goodbye and thank you for watching.